Chapter 11. And when Athaliah, the mother of Azahiah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Azahiah, took Joash, the son of Azahiah, and stole him from among the king's sons, which were slain. And they hid him, even him and his nurse, in the bedchamber from Athaliah, so that he was not slain. And he was with her hid in the house of the Lord 6 years. And Athaliah did reign over the land. And in the 7th year Jehoiada sent and fetched the rulers over hundreds, with the captains and the guard, and brought them to him into the house of the Lord, and made a covenant with them, and took an oath of them in the house of the Lord, and shewed them the king's son. And he commanded them, saying, This is the thing that ye shall do. A third part of you that enter in on the Sabbath shall even be keepers of the watch of the king's house. And a third part shall be at the gate of Sur, and a third part at the gate behind the guard. So shall ye keep the watch of the house, that it be not broken down. And 2 parts of all you that go forth on the Sabbath day, even they shall keep the watch of the house of the Lord about the king. And ye shall compass the king round about, every man with his weapons in his hand, and he that cometh within the ranges, let him be slain. And be ye with the king as he goeth out, and as he cometh in. And the captains over the hundreds did according to all things that Jehoiada the priest commanded. And they took every man his men that were come in on the Sabbath, with them that should go out on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. And the captains over hundreds did the priest, and to the captains over hundreds did the priest give King David spears and shields that were in the temple of the Lord. And the guard stood, every man with his weapons in his hand, round about the king, from the right corner of the temple to the left corner of the temple, along by the altar and the temple. And he brought forth the king's son, and put the crown upon him, and gave him the testimony, and they made him king, and anointed him, and they clapped their hands, and said, God save the king. And when Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she came to the people into the temple of the Lord. And when she looked, behold, the king stood by a pillar, as the manner was, and the princes and the trumpeters by the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced and blew with trumpets. And Athaliah rent her clothes and cried, Treason, treason! But Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of the hundreds and the officers of the host, and said unto them, Have her forth without the ranges, and him that followeth her kill with the sword. For the priest had said, Let her not be slain in the house of the Lord. And they laid hands on her, and she went by the way by the which the horses came into the king's house, and there she was slain. And Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they should be the Lord's people, between the king also and the people. And all the people of the land went into the house of Baal, and brake it down. His altars and his images brake they in pieces thoroughly, and slew Mattan the priest of Baal before the altars. And the priest appointed officers over the house of the Lord. And he took the rulers of hundreds, and the captains, and the guard, and all the people of the land, and they brought down the king from the house of the Lord, and came by the way of the gate of the guard to the king's house, and he sat on the throne of the kings. And all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was in quiet, and they slew Athaliah with the sword beside the king's house. 7 years old was Jehoash when he began to reign. We see here an instance of power grabbing and power hungry. Athaliah is aware that her husband has been killed. He's died. And so she decides that she is going to take over ruling Israel, or ruling Judah actually. But in order to do that, she needs to kill all the other people that have a claim, which would be all of the royal children. And she decides she's going to do that. But the aunt of one of the boys takes the boy, Jehoash, and she escapes. And they hide him in the temple for 6 years. Now the temple was the core part of Jerusalem. And so it was utmost secrecy necessary to make sure that he was there and that nobody learned about it. And when he was 7, Jehoiada, who was the prophet, decided that it was time. And so he sent members of the military around through all of Judah in order to gather up the Levites and for them to come to the temple and to participate in the coronation of the 7-year-old king, which they did. The captains of the hundreds, all the rest of the military people, all the rest of the leaders, the princes of the tribes, they were there. The leaders of the various groups of people were there. They blew the trumpets. And Athaliah had been ruler, exclusive ruler, for a number of years. And she showed up in the temple to see what all the noise was about. And when she saw the young king over by one of the pillars, which is where the king stood, okay, whoever stood there, that was that spot standing there, surrounded by the chiefs, the princes of the various tribes, the military people, all the rest of this. This said that this young man was the king. He had just been proclaimed as the king. She cried out, "Treason, treason!" Rent her clothes. And Jehoiada, got to remember how morally corrupt this woman was. Jehoiada had her taken out of the temple. She wasn't killed there, taken out of there, and that she was slain with the edge of the sword away from the temple ground. And the 7-year-old began to rule. Now obviously as a 7-year-old he isn't going to know what to do. So Jehoiada, as the prophet, would have been the one to give him the advice as to what to do. Now you got to remember, this is at a time when 14, 15, and 16-year-old boys were commanders of military units, armies as a matter of fact. I think it's 16. Alexander the Great had an army of 100,000 men that followed him. They were considered men by that age. And so he had 7 to 9 years to grow up under Jehoiada's tutelage and learn the things that he needed to learn in order to be a righteous king. We'll see how well he did.